Hold on to your hats, guys. Strap yourselves in. Today we are going critical. Yes, that's what our Regcast is about today. But first of all, a serious announcement. This week there have been disturbing allegations about the conduct of the media, and it is no exaggeration to say that the entire reputation of the British press depends on our performance in this studio. And yet they put me in charge, which is not a good start. However, I do know that our guests today have every confidence in my integrity. I know that because I checked their voicemails 20 minutes ago. Guys, welcome to the studio. First of all today, from Microsoft at the end of the desk, there is Andrew Fryer. Andrew, Deep Fat Fryer, that is your Twitter handle, isn't it?
It is, yes. There's so many Andrews in the office that I had to kind of differentiate myself.
None of the others called Deep Fat.
Funny enough, no.
No, that's true. What do you do at Microsoft, Andrew?
I'm an evangelist, which does mean I get some interesting spam, but essentially is about working with our latest technologies, trying to make sense of what they're going to look like in the world when we release them upon the IT community in the wild, try and help people to get the most out of the stuff that they've already got as well, by blogging, by appearing on shows like this, presenting in person when they let me out of the office, and really just sort of articulating what our vision of the private cloud looks like to the TechNet community.
Well,
that whole world. Yeah.
Well, you've obviously had practice at this, so let's see if it works in the next hour or so. Oh, don't build up your part yet. Now, next to Andrew is our guest from the real world today, and no slight intended on anyone else in the studio. Actually, there is, and that's from Visual, Alan Rogers. Hello, Alan.
Hello.
What does Visual do?
We're a Microsoft Gold partner. We design, deploy and implement Microsoft technology, and that's kind of all we do.
But specifically, what kind of technologies?
So, core platform, so core infrastructure, things like System Center, Forefront, the core Windows platform, messaging, and a little bit of SharePoint and CRM on the side too.
Do you have an interesting Twitter handle?
No, it's just Alan Rogers. Nothing that glamorous, I'm afraid.
It's one of the problems getting in early. You get to use your own name. And finally, from our old mates, Freeform Dynamics, it's Andy Buss. Hello, Andy.
Hi, Tim.
Twitter handle?
Just my name.
Oh, that's so disappointing. I'm Tim Svengali. But now, my name, of course, is Tim Phillips. I am the broadcast editor here, and so I will take responsibility. And please let us know, because if there are any transgressions that do happen on my watch, I will shoulder the responsibility of firing everybody else and staying in my job, because that's how things are done in the press. Just to let you know, first of all, before we get started, and how you use the interface, just the things you need to know. The questions button's the one to worry about. Ask the questions. We have some guys, I could hardly stop them talking out there about this stuff. So if you've got a question, they will know the answer. I can't guarantee they'll get to it in less than 15 minutes, but they will know the answer. So please do ask the questions. Don't complain if your question wasn't asked before. Now, it's also some, if you download the slides, there's some pretty good information on the slides today. So they are worth downloading and saving, or even printing. OK, let's crack on with it. Andy Buss, you told me this. What are we talking about? We're talking about critical applications. What are we talking about?
Well, really, we're talking about the apps that, when they go wrong, the phones start ringing very quickly, and you know about it very soon.
But that's not any one particular kind of app we're talking about today.
There's a whole spectrum of them, and really it's the apps that tend to stop money coming in, goods going out, or the business overall functioning. So these are the ones that often have their tentacles across the business, and sometimes we don't even realise just how far they extend in and where they influence.
So Deep Fat, why is it difficult virtualising these? Why do we have to have a special Regcast about it?
Well, they do touch a lot of other things. When an application goes wrong, it might not actually be the application itself. It could be that someone has pulled a network cable out somewhere. It could be the chillers have gone offline in a data centre. It could be anything. It doesn't really matter to the users. So you need to understand all the dependencies on that one application Domain controller might be another one, for example. You might not have thought about that too much, but suddenly it becomes super important. It's not there.
These are typically the ones that were so scary you didn't touch them when you started virtualising at first. Those are the ones we'll do the easy ones, we'll do the modern ones, we'll leave that, because if that goes wrong, that's going to be a problem. It's, when you say what's critical, I would say it's the ones where if they fail, if you're responsible for them, they're career limiting. That's the definition of a critical app from an IT pro's perspective. It fails, you get fired.
Are you getting your calls from your clients now to say, we've got to get into this at the moment?
I'd say people have done the easy stuff, and we'll talk about later on, moving from physical tin to virtualisation, that's kind of done, but it's the tricky, hard stuff, the one that has complex requirements, maybe complex hardware interaction, the performance is difficult to understand, or maybe the vendor doesn't typically support it. You're getting a "we're not interested" message from the vendor. Those are the kind of things that, they're more complicated, and it doesn't mean you can't do them, you just have to think a little bit harder about it first.
Right, and it's the hard thinking we're going to get today. We're going to get the results of your hard thinking. I don't want all the hard thinking, because we've only got an hour. But let's have that. Andy Butts, tell me a little bit about this. This is basic virtualisation. This is saying that, from our audience, we're all into it now.
We've pretty much undergone at least the first wave of virtualisation, and that's really a consolidation effect. So what's happened is a lot of people have actually got experience of virtualisation, but it's not really what we'd call full-scale dynamic IT. It is very much consolidation and running IT in the old way, but on far fewer boxes in many cases.
Yeah, but I mean, fair enough. They're just doing what they were told to do, weren't they, guys? I mean, this is, by saying, virtualisation, it was presented a couple of years ago as get rid of all your servers. Yeah, and this is, make sure your utilisation goes up. We've done that.
We have, yeah.
Yeah, that job's now finished. And we're moving on from that now today. Yeah. Okay. Now let's have a look. So consolidation ratios, 5 to 1, 10 to 1, these are the things most common.
They are. I mean, bigger businesses, of course, may be able to get 50 to 1, 100 to 1, or even more. But in the main, what we see when we do the surveys is 5 to 1 to 10 to 1. And they're generally managed in the old way, which is, it used to be you managed one bit of kit with an app and a server. Now you're managing one bit of kit, maybe with 5 to 10 apps and servers on them. But we're very much doing it in the old way we've done before. So it's been almost a suck it and see approach in many cases.
So we got there, and we've got this, and we're sticking these things on. If you if you do this with your critical apps, and you just do your consolidating down, so you've got less. Andrew, you got fewer boxes kicking around. Are people suddenly finding, I've got a problem I didn't have before, or are they not noticing?
I'm sure Alan's going to come in a minute as well,
Yeah.
But absolutely they are having problems, because let's take something trivial. Those 5 boxes had each one of those had a network card sticking out the back. The new shiny box, has it got the same network bandwidth as those 5 network cards coming out the back of? Because I've only got one now, so I've got 5 NICs in the back of the box. So even though internally the application might be running okay, it may be not getting out there quickly enough. And then we can have the same conversation about compute power, RAM, how fast is the SAN, and the connectivity to the SAN. Bear in mind there were 5 pipes onto the SAN from those 5 other servers. Now we need, are we going to get 5 times as much out of this one box? Some things don't change. And when we talk about mission critical apps, usually at the back there's something that's going to require some fairly fast disk access, like a database, Exchange server, SharePoint, some sort of portal. Is going to need some fairly fast disk access, and those things can suffer as well. So sometimes people have just gone round willy-nilly rounding these things up without really much regard for what was on the boxes beforehand.
I think that's a key point, is that this consolidation ratio, 5 to 1, 10 to 1, how was that derived? Typically you'd expect that to be a common sense approach to not overloading a single piece of tin, but is there kind of any science to the fact that we've got 5 or between 5 and 10 on now, the box is 100% utilised, not 100% utilised, where is the bottleneck? And therefore, it's going a bit further now. In terms of critical apps, what are the bottlenecks? And is 10 enough? Is 10 too much? Can we go to 50? And it's making some science out of something that was probably common sense that got to that ratio.
So this is the rule of thumb problem: is you carry on virtualising until everything starts to slow down and grind to a halt.
Sure.
And that's actually not the way to do it.
Than you were before.
That's not the way to do it. Yeah. The winner's curse of virtualising.
I think I think from Microsoft.com we went for about 5 to 1 with SQL Server at the back of it, and we got 5,000 instances of SQL Server running virtualised back in Microsoft.com. So that's been up. I think if that was down for a day, you guys, it would be on your website, wouldn't it? I'm sure.
I think we probably noticed.
Yes,
Yeah,
you'd noticed, wouldn't you? Yeah. So that's been quite a good story for us. And one of the things we do is publish, our own. The way we do IT, and I appreciate you might think we've got a bunch of engineers, but we still like to make a little bit of money every now and then, so we try and do that profitably and as efficiently as possible. So some of that best practice is perhaps worth a look at as well.
Yeah, but if I was going to do this in a rule of thumb way, and I virtualise everything, I stick my critical apps and I squeeze them all together onto a box, and then things start to slow down a little bit, and I'm thinking, that's not very good. I'll just throw a little bit more hardware at them, a little bit more network and stuff like that. It solves all the problems, doesn't it?
The trick is knowing what to pour in where. It's like making a cake. Is it more flour, more water, or more eggs? You've got to have to understand the science to work out which bits to add and when.
Uh-huh.
And it might not be anything to do with the ingredients, it's the baking time. It's more to it. Do you know what I mean? In terms of network, you could throw 10 gig switches, but if you've got an uplink to another network and it's a slow backplane, it won't make a difference anyway.
And
it's just about the science.
How did you know it was slow?
I don't
How do you know it's slow?
I don't manage servers. Is this coming across?
But my point is how can you say something slower than it was? I mean, I think there's like in the DBA community that my background is in, there's this big resistance to virtualization, and there still is to a certain extent, but they haven't really done any testing. You need to understand how fast your environment is today. And many DBAs in small organisations really don't do that kind of work. It's only in the larger, the banks and so on and so forth, where they really are trying to squeeze the ultimate performance out of everything, that they actually understand how well the systems are performing at the moment. But whether you're going to do an upgrade, whether you're going to virtualise, whether you're going to cluster, whatever it is you're going to do, you should have a baseline. This is science, yeah?
Absolutely. This is the thing, people make it up, people guess, like this consolidation issue, they're guessing that, if I had a single Exchange server, I probably wouldn't want to have more than 2 or 3 on a physical piece of tin, but no one actually knows.
And it could vary hour day to day, and unless you actually know that baseline and also have some performance monitoring going on, you really don't know where the problem may lie, whether it is on the box, in the network, in the storage, or somewhere else. So there is really a limit to what you can achieve by going by rule of thumb.
So this is the stuff. This is the stuff we're going to cover, isn't it? And this is the thing. But so my final sort of question on the setup then is: do we have evidence that people are just not doing things, like in your DBA community? They're just not doing things because that'll never work.
Well, I've had the people not doing anything. They decide to put all their. They do consolidate SQL Server, for example, and they put it on one physical environment and don't do anything to do with virtualization with that. We're not doing that. That's one policy I've seen.
Yeah.
I've also seen the data center admin, if you will, just sort of coming over the hill and saying, right, we're virtualizing everything that moves, we're virtualizing this, that and the other, and not really consulting the DBA. And then the DBA is having to explain to their customers, maybe in a local office, in the case I heard recently, that their performance is tanking and not really being able to do anything about it.
Oh,
so,
okay. That's not very good.
No,
that
not
DBA,
really.
we're sorry for you.
Yeah. So there's a lot of unhappy DBAs out there.
Yeah, Alan, you're saying from your experience, this is the people are just not doing stuff. From the if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a risk in changing things. Why would you take on more risk? Why would you open yourself up to that? It's just it's too hard. Why bother?
Okay, so why? Why? Yeah. So what? But there is that, so people might say, okay, I'll get a pretty good result from virtualizing all the non-essential stuff, or the stuff that doesn't really matter very much. If the performance is here, I'll leave this other stuff as well. We're saying that's not good enough. You should aspire to more.
Well, we're saying that there's benefits in doing it.
Yeah.
It's back to answer my own question around why bother. Well, there's a reason, so that's why you would bother.
Yeah. I don't say it's one reason. Here's Andy Buss's reason why.
Yeah, and it's because over time we're basically changing the way we want to deliver IT, and what we're seeing is a gradual move towards thinking about services that are delivered rather than individual bits of kit.
Yeah.
So we are starting to think more and more about services. And when we think about that, we think more in terms of what's the actual performance being delivered, what is the experience when it's being used, not about is this piece of kit big enough. And in that way, we've then got to manage, really, the ability to scale up and down, etc., and be more flexible. And what we find is that workloads are becoming a lot more dynamic than they were before. So if we think of consolidation, that we've done through virtualization. That's really just taken your fixed infrastructure, consolidated it down, but it's still mostly fixed and static, just a few more on the same box.
It's just fewer servers,
but now,
but it's the same thing.
What we're looking at to meet some of the business needs, which is changing on, say, a daily, weekly, sometimes hourly basis, the ability to be more dynamic and make sure that the service levels that have been either agreed or have come to be expected over time are met. And so either we're becoming more dynamic, so moving towards a cloud-like environment, or even using external partners that can ramp services up and down because they provide it to us as a service.
By this, you're saying we are. It sounds like it's work in progress, but how many people is this work in progress for?
Well, if we move forward, we can see what the reg readers are telling us. And still today, the vast majority is consolidation, frankly. That's where it is today. But what's growing is both the pooling of resources, so where we're not really dynamic, but we're able to use certain types of equipment, so certain classes of performance, reliability, storage, for example. So it's pools of resources. But even also, if we look at that, we can see dynamic infrastructure becoming more important. So that's emerging, and this is the way the reg readership is going. They're wanting to become more dynamic, and it's about how do we get there? Because if we don't get all of the apps and services really into a dynamic virtual way, we're not going to be able to achieve that. So this is why one of the reasons why it's important to consider virtualizing those critical apps to get in with that flexible dynamic infrastructure.
I guess that cloud resourcing thing at the bottom, if you did this survey 6 months or a year ago, would have been non-existent virtually.
Well, to be honest, it is changing slightly, but that cloud resourcing being external isn't changing all that much. People... But most of the IT buyers and architects, etc., are very comfortable with their existing data center concepts, etc. They don't really want to move everything out that quickly. So it's small, interest is growing, and long term we actually expect that to become
So perhaps what
bigger.
I'm saying is, though, that if we did this survey every 6 months, we'd expect to see
a move
this
down from the top to the bottom would fill out and everything. But at the same time, I mean, it's a cloud thing a couple of weeks ago, and when you're looking at, it was actually a cloud exhibition thing, and I was talking to the audience, getting them to do a show of hands on stuff, and when you're getting people who are actually involved in this sort of stuff, then you get sort of one or two people putting their hand up, and everyone else is it's what the IT people say. They say they're kicking the tyres on this sort of thing, and so they're thinking about it, don't know where to start.
Yeah, that's kind of where virtualisation was 4 or 5 years ago. If this was virtualisation x64, on the same chart, you'd show a similar thing. You'd show the bottom would be virtualisation. Most people are looking at it, and now we're saying people have done it, and it's the continual evolution, isn't it? And it's just progression.
But this is harder than virtualisation. That's one thing.
Well, no, not necessarily. If it's harder than virtualisation, that means you probably got virtualisation wrong in the first place, because you probably just virtualised tin. You didn't actually think about what you were doing or why.
Okay, I see what you're saying. This is fair enough. Yeah,
you were just following the trend.
Yeah. Well, it's not for me to speak for the audience. You let me let us know what you think about that. But when also, Andy, your graph shows that the targets that people have at the moment are mostly around static environments, virtualizing static environments. This is their ambition at the moment.
And it's also about which are the workloads that are easiest to virtualize.
Yeah.
And it comes down to those which are edge-type apps where users interact with them. It's the actual delivery mechanism. If it fails or it doesn't perform, it's got limited impact. What people feel are least virtualizable are those core services. And these are the ones that we're talking about today, getting virtualized to get dynamic IT. And these are the ones where we've got to think through really the full architecture before we try and do it, because the impact is so big.
Security and database at the bottom. This, Andrew, this is what you said. Well, again, you already mentioned a database. Think security there as well.
I think yes, there are. The domain controller again is a tricky beast. Obviously, we can have several of them. I think perhaps the database is a little unusual in that it doesn't scale. You can't normally stand up 4 nodes. I mean, some database vendors claim to be able to get some scalable performance by doing that, stand up 4 nodes and write to one database. Certainly Microsoft haven't got that technology. So there are other ways of making it scale. And if we think about private cloud being an emulation of public cloud and we're looking for elasticity and scale, then web servers do that pretty well. Might come back to that point later. Some servers, file and print, some things do that really well. I think we were talking about some music streaming earlier, weren't we? It scales quite well. but some things don't scale well. So you can't just stand up another VM. So they're kind of less susceptible to this kind of concept of themselves. Obviously, the vendors are changing the applications themselves to make them better citizens on a virtual network, and hopefully developers and in-house developers are doing the same with their apps as well.
Yeah, and if I look at this chart, on the left-hand side, I see kind of complexity and performance at the bottom and simplicity at the top, and application servers, you can put a wrap around them, you can sandbox them and understand how they'll perform. Whereas security, there's loads of moving parts. If you get it wrong, then there's significant impact. Again, security, if you've got something like that's logging, and if your login service goes off, therefore the firewall starts shutting down, the complexity is significant, and that's why people you do it last. Same with web databases. We've already said people don't necessarily understand the performance, so rather than walk straight into it, you'd rather work it out slowly, and that's to me that seems kind of common sense how most people would be approaching it.
Is there anything we shouldn't be virtualising? Anyone can take that if you want. Andrew Buss, you take that first.
I mean, you can look at it in a way of if you've got a baseline and you try to virtualise it and you get absolutely no benefit or a penalty, those are the type of workloads, again, you shouldn't. But then again, there's things like workloads with very big memory requirements, which may not work when you've got multiple VMs on the same machine. But you may be able to virtualise it just on its own for management benefit, but trying to run it in a multi-VM environment is difficult. The other side may be something like regulation, for example. If the regulations haven't quite caught up with IT, we should also be cautious about virtualising without being aware of that. So, for example, certain financial institutions may be required to limit the data to a particular box, and moving it around the data centre may breach regulations.
That's crazy, isn't it? I mean,
it is a bit crazy.
Weird. I mean, it's
it
just
happens.
I can see it over there, therefore it must be all right. It's ridiculous.
Now I can point to it on my screen, not in a rack.
Yeah, it's like, it's just silly. But it's, guys, from your point of view, technically, is there anything that people should just steer clear of? Or is anything available for virtualisation if you do it right?
Well, I was going to throw a non-technical one there, is licensing, so not all vendors are licensing friendly, virtualisation friendly, so that's a reason why you necessarily wouldn't. Some things, it'll be potentially more expensive. You have to license all of the cores that the machine might use, rather than the ones it's actually going to use. So those are the more tricky ones, and there's no technical solution to that.
Okay. Yes, there isn't. There's a way
Apart
for the
from
vendors
migration.
to
to catch up. And I'll be the first to admit our licensing has become more virtualisation friendly.
It's not finished. Not quite got all the way there yet, has it? People still like to complain.
People are always going to complain when they have to write a check. I get that, but I think we're offering ever greater value for money, considering how powerful and parallel modern servers are compared with where they were 3 or 4 years ago, even.
Yes. Okay. Now let's. Andy, you got one. I never understand these things with the sort of like the lozenge down the side and the ones across the bottom. Tell me what. Yeah.
Well, this is really just about that. When you start to move to these core workloads, it's very much about the whole architecture. You've got to think about all the input-output, the memory, what are the interactions, and make sure you're taking all of it into account when architecting it. And more than anything, it's again dynamic IT and sort of full virtualization is about the management, because if you can't measure it, you can't monitor it, then you can't manage it, and it becomes so complex that ideally you don't know where the problem might be if you don't have a good management framework.
You're also having to squash people's responsibilities together, aren't you? I mean, these are things that are done typically in different bits of the office.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think we look at the shape of the IT department is changing. I think cloud is driving that, and that is driving some fear and uncertainty. The guys who used to be in the data centre running around flicking switches and spinning up tin and what have you, clearly are an endangered species. Now, I'm not suggesting they're going to be out of work, but they've got to, if you're doing the same thing day in, day out, whatever walk of life you're in, frankly, today, either it's going to be outsourced to another country or it's going to be scripted by somebody, pretty much. Whether that's conveyancing, whether that's travel agent kind of work, those things, those roles are frankly disappearing, and this area, this aspect of IT is disappearing. So, what I do believe is needed, though, is the person who can be a broker between the business and the IT department to get the services that they want and understand what they want. And
who is that person? What authority do they have? What job are they doing there?
Well, I think they could be working in the IT department, but at the moment they're if you looked at the organisational chart, they'll be under the IT director or maybe under the finance director. Sometimes you don't have an IT member on the board. So sometimes the IT manager reports into the FD. That's quite a common scenario. But if you think about maybe splitting that department up and saying, well, actually, you're going to be responsible for the IT and marketing, and you're going to be responsible for the IT, and maybe you start to learn a little bit about what that business does, and they start to learn a little bit about what IT is all about, and you're provisioning services for that department in this kind of modern world. So they aren't just going to, we were talking outside about just going out and buying a box. It's not how we're going to do that. We're going to do it differently. We're going to do it smarter.
You're right. It's not about just standing stuff up and making it work anymore. That's kind of, as I was saying earlier, that's the first 20%. The biggest part of the job is actually, once you've got it stood up and working, is making sure that the business is using it properly. They get what they intended when they gave you the cash to buy it. It works. They get the benefit they thought they were going to get, and that when you're running the environment, you've got control of all the bits. As we were saying earlier, it's about, some of this is an art and a science, and it's about having control of all of it. And as you say, having people moving from roles where they're just standing up tin in data centres to going out into the business and working with the users and making sure these things work in the way they expect, and you can measure the impact or the lack of impact from how these things are working.
So we're enabling IT as well to support those business functions. So you're looking at opportunities, in the marketing department, in the sales department. You're thinking about, you're aware of the rhythms of the business as well. You know that, financial year end is coming up. So you want to make sure that you've got the resources so that everybody can burn the midnight oil and close the accounts of the year. Whereas if you're in the retail arm, you've got your freeze coming up into the Christmas period. You've been doing some work with a rather smart tailor, haven't you, Alan?
That's a nice shirt, isn't it? Tell me where that shirt's from.
From a shop.
Come on, Mr. Fashion. Yeah, but I mean, for example, the fashion business is extremely, seasonal. They're going to have a different kind of critical application than most.
Yeah, but in retail and in fashion, retail peak is king. You don't get any downtime at all. To the point where a change freeze will kick in. From around September till January, February, because you just don't take a single chance. And uptime is king. Absolutely king, and being able to report on it again. If you're an IT person in one of those organisations, it's kind of really useful to be able to identify what the responsibility of some of those impacts and those issues were. Because as I said about career limiting, favour of an app being career limiting, it's kind of nice to understand if something did fail, how and why.
But see, here's the thing: you're responsible for that app. It's career limiting if it fails. And what we're saying is this responsibility now crosses different departments, and it crosses, and it crosses different ideas. Much more holistic management sort of role. So, what is the person who's in charge of that? Do they have to be given extra authority? Do you need extra authority to be able to move things your way if it's critical apps compared to if you're minding the email?
You need more control, don't you? You need to know how your app's working.
Exactly what do you need?
Well, I say you need more control. You need, the instrumentation. You need to be able to, see how it's performing, and also see the end user's impact or the end user's vision of, view of how the application is performing. So, you can Exchange being a good example. You can monitor it. You'll have huge memory consumption from store.exe, but from a user perspective, Outlook will be going fine. And likewise, you can have a completely different story, and Outlook will be freezing every 4 minutes. And it's kind of, have it seeing both sides. And, this is what this slide is saying, getting the wrap around the entirety of the application from the user end all the way to the server end and seeing all of it properly is kind of what gives you that control. Yeah. And then, the authority then kind of, is inherited from that, because if you understand how all of it works, you're not asking for authority, you're just stating fact. This is our problem, and it needs a resolution.
And ideally, because when we start to treat these applications as sort of the business apps that they are, they should have service-level agreements behind them, and we should be monitoring them. Mm-hmm. And in a virtual environment, it is possible, if you've got the management in front of it, to actually get perhaps earlier insight into when things are going a little bit wrong and start to pull it back again, so we can avoid it becoming a career-limiting event. It can just be a blip along the way, and you pull it back in before it actually becomes a problem.
We talk a lot about SLAs at the moment, Andy Bass, don't we? And you've got a nice little phrase for SLAs that aren't really
not official SLAs. Yes, the SLEs, which is service level expectations, which is what happens to an app when it just evolves over time and people get used to it. Mm-hmm. And as soon as any little thing goes wrong, the phones start ringing, and you've got very little backup if you don't actually have an agreement in place to say, well, that's not what you should be expecting, because that's what you've been delivering and what is now become commonplace. So it's about actually getting on top of what apps you're running and what people use and value. So one of the best approaches is to take a proper business-led service-level agreement approach to the critical and important apps.
That is because you can have a best effort environment, but that best effort can be extremely good.
Yeah.
And it can be matching expectations. But what we're saying is when we are virtualizing the critical apps, it becomes much more important to know what you're doing and to be able to put numbers on what you're doing.
Yes.
Well, to be frank, there has to be a business need to be running towards a virtual environment.
Okay.
And therefore, you should know what the business needs are and the expectations are, and that should define the agreement you work to. And as IT, you have to be comfortable that the funding you get from the business can actually help you provide that. And you need to make sure that you're providing that agreed level of service no matter what.
Andrew,
the other thing, throughout life, there's no point being good at something unless you're able to demonstrate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
and that's another point. As you say, been having the right level of tools, instrumentation, be able to say, we've taken this application, we've virtualised it, performance was X, now it's Y, and in terms of the recoverability scenarios, the management scenarios, they've all improved, and I can show you with empirical proof that that's what happened. You can check it yourself. It's really, really, really important to do that.
And that reminds me, actually, I worked with a charity a couple of months ago who were in the luxury of moving to a completely new building, greenfield site, new data centre. They're a green charity, so they're one of their things they're looking at as being really super green. But they didn't do it to the point where they wanted users to be sacrificed. So though they're going down the thin client route, I mean, this is perhaps a little way away from what we're talking about today, but it was mission critical that they got this right. That they actually over-engineered the back-end service because they wanted the move to virtualization, the move to the new building, to be a positive experience for the users. So although they were able to cut their daily electricity charges from £137 to about £10.50 a day, which is a huge amount of saving, they didn't go all the way. They, if you like, banked some of that against goodwill and PR to make sure the users have got nice twin LED monitors, 24-inch and sort of smart desk working environment to make people feel very, very positive about IT. And I think we kind of forget to almost market ourselves sometimes. Maybe we're in IT like me because of a lack of personal skills. We can just talk to computers and we can turn them off if we get annoyed, that sort of thing. But actually we have to be ambassadors for the services and so on that we represent. And this kind of modern role I was sort of positing of going out and looking for opportunities to do cool things and to make a difference and just to go and help people out with that. That's the kind of world that we want to be in. It's great. It's very rewarding to be able to help people and move the business on, whereas being sort of stuck in a dark, either being frozen or fried in a data centre underground or in the attic, really isn't that much fun, is it, frankly?
No. Well, no, absolutely not. Andy Buss has got a little switch. You can turn him off if you get annoyed with him, actually. It's really handy.
I got that from C-3PO.
Now, when we're talking about getting it, to be specific, when we're talking about getting a handle on sort of managing the whole thing, to explain. This is Microsoft's interpretation.
Yes,
of it.
My marketing slide.
This is your marketing slide, and we'll give you a little bit of time with a normal service review.
So. We talk about System Center a lot, and I do get sometimes I get some flack from people sort of saying, System Centers, all these different tools, there are so many of them, I don't understand what they're all for, and so on and so forth. But they're all there really to make sure that you have a truly dynamic data center, and they each have a specific purpose. But really, until recently, we haven't had sort of a cohesive layer over the top of them. You could argue that, that although you System Center this, talk to System Center that. Virtual machine manager talking to operations manager, whichever one it was, and I don't want to get too much into a sort of a picture. What we really needed to be able to do was to script and automate things, and I also believe that what we need to be able to do is to be able to respond to requests. So the two newer kids on the block in here, there's one, the Aparlis acquisition we made, which is going to turn into a product called Orchestrator, which is now in beta, you can try, and the other one is Service Manager.
That's in a beta that people can
download right now. Absolutely. It's on my blog how to install it and have a quick go with it.
That's a plug for your blog as well.
It was a good plug for my blog. I thought I'd work that in, yeah. You're signing later.
Come on with your management.
So the orchestrator is like you're drawing Visio diagrams. You're connecting pieces up. The start of the process could be an event. Something's gone wrong on a box. Something's gone wrong on a virtual machine, a service, whatever it is, from some of the other System Center products. But it could be that you've got a watch on your service desk. It doesn't have to be Microsoft Service Desk. It could be any of the market-leading ones out there. And the telemetry can also come in from HP OpenView, from the Computer Associates. So it's a piece of glue that sits there. And then you decide on what you're going to do. So the basic premise comes down to, if you're having to do something more than 10 times in your data center, script it, automate it, put some process around it, some proper quality around it, and let that process work for you. Now, sometimes if you get a process that's happening repeatedly, like you're having to restart a machine because it keeps dropping, well, you actually need to have a process to monitor the process, if you will, because if that's happening too often, clearly there's something wrong with that box.
Just automating it doesn't actually take away
Not necessarily.
what the fundamental problem is.
There's no substitute for thinking, you know.
Yeah.
And so you do need to think about how you use some of these tools. But the idea of making everything work back to the help desk, so you've got a proper audit log of what you've done, you're monitoring and managing and changing the state of the machines, the fact that a hotfix has been applied, a patch has been applied, the system has been reset, we've taken the machine out of production, if you will, and put it into maintenance mode so it doesn't count against our SLAs. You know, it's planned maintenance. So we can properly monitor and manage how the data center is working at the back end. And Alan's going to tell you about some of the stuff he's... I'm going to put him on it now, because you actually implement this, don't you?
Yeah.
For your clients, are a lot of them using this?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so, you know, I'm not employed by Microsoft, but there's a way of licensing it. So there's something called an ECI enrollment for core infrastructure, where when you virtualize, you can get all of the tools in a suite for that physical tin.
What's it called again?
ECI, the enrollment for core infrastructure. So you basically get all of the kit within a single license for all your virtual machines. So, you know, as a result, we do quite a lot of this, and we do deploy the whole tool set because, you know, it's a wrap around all of it. And, you know, on the previous slide, and we talked about, you know, being in control and having the orchestration, having the instrumentation to understand how your environment's working. It provides all of it. And as I was saying to Andrew earlier, you know, Service Desk is kind of your window out to the users, and you can delegate some control of your environment by allowing users to, you know, provision applications, and in the next versions they'll be able to request virtual machines and, you know, and scale the environment on demand from an end user perspective. But then on the back end, you know, for an IT pro, you've got things like Ops Manager, where, you know, you're not necessarily going to be worrying about raising tickets. You're resolving and responding to alerts, and the tickets getting open and closed for you in the back end. So, you know, you're not getting turned into a paper monkey just running around filling in forms. You concentrate on the stuff you do, but the suite allows people to concentrate on what they're good at and interface in the relevant ways.
Is this generally good advice, or is this specific to critical apps?
I think this is generally good advice. Yeah. It's something you should do, but it's something you must do if you.
It's the thing you can't afford to do on a critical app.
Yeah. You wouldn't necessarily invest in this just for those easy applications. No. But it's absolutely essential for the critical apps.
At the moment, it's still a minority of Reg readers who are taking this approach, isn't it?
To take on the full approach, yeah. Most of the time, it's a fairly fragmented environment, so it's getting on top of this management that we think is one of the most critical elements for looking both at a private cloud environment, but specifically also for running these core apps.
You don't buy these bits individually, and a lot of your readers will have access
bits
to
and
the
pieces
stuff.
of different.
So I'm not actually trying. This isn't really a sales pitch. It's pretty much that they've probably got the System Center suite, and if they've got a reasonably large data center, they've got one bit of it. They've actually got all of it. It's a bit like using Access and then thinking, oh, hang on a minute, there's this thing called PowerPoint. Maybe you ought to have a look at that, because they've already got the suite. So that's why I wanted to call this out, really. That if you're using Ops Manager, maybe it's time to start joining up to some of the other bits and having a go with some of the other stuff. So that you've got this predictability coming into mission-critical apps. When something happens, this is what we're going to do. We can demonstrate it, we can test it, we can agree it with you. This is how we're going to respond. This is what we're going to do when things go wrong.
But the thing with some of these tools, you can use them before you virtualise too. So things like Ops Manager, you know, say you've got a database and you're worried about performance, and, you know, if you talk to, one of the things that people don't move is databases initially. You can use Ops Manager, monitor the performance, see how it's really performing, see what it really needs for disk I/O, what it really needs for CPU, what the work, the peak work times are, and then you get an accurate assessment before you move it, and you can monitor that over a long period of time. You could spend a year monitoring your SQL servers before you decided to move them.
You need to capture all the rhythms of the business. I think the other thing on the monitoring before you virtualise, something we haven't actually got in this deck, is the Microsoft Assessment and Planning Toolkit, which is just a free download. And that will take you through everything from hardware, software inventory of your estate, be it physical or virtual, and allows you to plan any change that you want to make. It might be upgrading SQL, it might be moving from one hypervisor to another without naming names. It might be that you want to start thinking about buying some new boxes and doing some sort of consolidation work, and it will just watch your environment for you using a range of tools. Bizarrely, even talking to things like Linux.
Why would that be so bizarre?
Well, I don't think it's bizarre, because I think what applications you want to run should be up to the customer, not up to me.
Yeah.
And although I might persuade you that might be other things you might want to run, the reality is you need to run this application, and we want to make sure you have a good experience with it.
Okay, so listen, we need to keep moving on, because we've been talking so far about sort of like how we cope with the world that we've got at the moment. What we're actually presenting is a different way in which IT is going to run in the future, and it's this. You can tell this is a Microsoft marketing slide, by the way, because it's got little pictures of people of different ethnicities, little head and shoulders pictures.
Well, that's because we are different ethnicities. I've got about 90 odd nationalities in my office.
I don't mind. I'm just saying it. But if we're looking at this all sounds like an awful lot of work, and we're saying that not always do you get a huge sort of benefit. You're not always going to say, oh, look at this, it works so much better.
I think it's understanding what those repeatable tasks are. I think, and attacking those first. Looking for the sweet spot. Like any IT kind of project, where's the biggest bang for my buck? If I'm constantly having to do this thing, let's get that sorted out so I don't have to do it anymore. The points about the pain that many people have with their help desks, not keeping the content management database, which is the core part of the system, up to date with what your systems look like. If that's done automatically for you, that's a huge, huge saving. Just having a place to go to and say, look, I've got 50 servers with these VMs on. Oh, and these are the VMs that are critical, because I know which ones they are. Because if you haven't got all that management information in place, you don't really know which one VM for another. It's just a file. It's just a line on a console somewhere.
Knowing who the system owner is. We've got this weird and wonderful app. Who actually cares about it? Because 90% of the business might not give a hoot about what it does.
Yeah. And what does it need? What's its appetite? We've all got like sort of stickers with what coffee we like, milk and sugar and so on and so forth. In the same way, the virtual machines need to, I want this compute, I want this RAM, I want this. All that information needs to be captured. I think even in a small, if you've got, I would say, more than 20 or 30 virtual machines, you're going to be into that place. Maybe Excel's not the place to do that.
And one of the things, of course, is doing this may actually be more expensive than just buying the tin and running the app. So you're not getting, say, a consolidation benefit out of this. This is action operations play as well. So some of the reasons we've given here is why we want to do this. Why do we want to make life difficult for ourselves if it's actually more difficult just to do the virtualization for these apps? Well, there are other business benefits that come along with it. So
how do you quantify these? How are we quantifying them? Is it easy to make this case?
Not always. And that's often because we don't actually know what we're doing in the first place, and we can't sell it to the business. So hence the point about getting a baseline. Putting management in place even before virtualizing, so you know what you were doing and can do it. But what the benefits you get from virtualizing them are things like being able to have more responsible, better business critical recovery, etc., scalability, and better service.
Alan, when you do these sort of projects, how do you how do you justify it? When you go back, how are you able to present to people we made a success of this? Do you do it in terms of sort of pounds, hours, people, what?
Kind of all of the above. They're all things that count, aren't they? You're able to you're able to demonstrate a number of things. Reducing space in the data center, getting rid of old cronky kit, and therefore you're having on-cost benefits of reducing maintenance, management, that kind of stuff, support costs. You're able to show a benefit in terms of taking something that wasn't able to be made highly available previously and make it highly available by virtue of the fact it's on a virtual machine. And they say just the general cost benefits in terms of, because because benefits are difficult to measure in one regard in that, you know, it may cost the same, but you've now got a dynamically managed environment. So, you know, you can show a benefit in two ways. You can either, you know, just drive hard cost out, or you can drive cost out and make it dynamically managed. And that shows additional benefits, which then have other benefits out to the business. And you can measure all of those in many scenarios.
And from my reg readers here, Andy Buss, these are what they talk about, the top 5 impacts. Now, on hardware procurement, this isn't something, you know, and provisioning, this isn't something that's specific for critical apps, is it? Where's the critical apps impact on this?
The critical apps is typically the 3, 4 and 5, which is you've got to think about what does virtualization actually bring us, why are we doing it, and it's the ability to deliver the service differently, more effectively, and maintain control. So it's about removing people from the day-to-day operations management and automating it, making it more reliable, predicting if it's getting out of spec, bringing it in line beforehand, which is more difficult to do if you're running directly on the tin, and especially if you don't have the management in place.
Yeah, there was an exclamation from you over there, Deep Fat.
Well, I think the hardware procurement, I think we ought to play up the commodity hardware. You know, you can buy... All the boxes are going to be largely the same, irrespective of whether they're running in mission-critical or non-mission-critical apps.
Yeah.
You aren't having to start buying exotic bits of kit because this project requires it.
Although we find that you tend to buy classes of kit, but it simplifies then how much of it you have to buy in each case.
So explain this to me sort of properly. So you have a sort of a mission-critical bunch of virtualized stuff over here where you buy the slightly better things.
Yeah, I mean, you may have some of the high-end processes with a lot of RAS, which are very expensive, but you don't want to buy your whole data center full of them, and that's reserved for certain apps. Then you may have, say, dual socket and then single socket type approaches for the different apps that you're running. You don't want to run a whole sea of identikit blades because it's not ideal for every type of workload.
Yeah, and gold sand and some of those kind of things as well. But I just think it just gives you options where you're just not having to go and buy another exotic piece of hardware because you've got another really complicated project to go and implement. You've got a lot more options going for you.
Yeah. That's it. Do you find, Alan, is this your experience again? Do you find that, again, when you're working across different types of applications, different classes of applications, that from either from your point of view or from your client's point of view, they prefer one identical set of procured servers or the different classes?
Yeah, it's interesting because, you know, I'm kind of a fan of, you know, where possible, standardising, you know, your tin. So, you know, been in IT a long time, as the badge can probably show. You know, if you're in a data centre at midnight and something's fallen apart, if all the boxes are identical, you can start, you know, cannibalising one to fix another.
Chances are you've got something in the cupboard.
You know, not naming names, but naming names. You know, if the whole data centre is built on DL380s, if you have, you know, 5 in your cluster and your other cluster fails, you just take something out of that one and bung it in that one, and you bring it back up. And you know, so I see a massive benefit in standardisation because you know, it's really simple to manage a data centre. Everybody knows how everything's built because it's the same. And like I say, you know, you can rob Peter to pay Paul, and when it's all gone down and you've got to get something back now, that's the most, you know, it's the wisest decision you've ever made. And I understand that at scale and where you're at a higher level of evolution in terms of cost management and managing larger environments, I think you're absolutely right. But, you know, a lot of people are kind of in this middle of the road where, you know, they've just consolidated. You know, we've already shown that, is it 80% of people are kind of, you know, their priority is just consolidating tin. And for those people, just a standard hardware model, the fact that you've got some, you know, some cannibalisation available to you in your data centre if you need it, and making it simpler to build and deploy is probably the most compelling reason.
We do have, you know, appliances relationships with most of the vendors. So you have fast-track reference architecture, so you get guaranteed performance, which can be very seductive as well. You know, I want this much compute network and bandwidth, and I normally buy my stuff from HP, Dell, whoever. Yeah. So we've kind of done all that work for you.
But what we're saying is, if you're going to go into virtualization and we're going to look at critical applications, have virtualization as the de facto standard. Then you can't just do it by saying we're going to do things the old way, just with the just with fewer boxes involved on this. This is
That's pretty much what we're saying. You've got to think differently. And one of the things we did in a recent study was look at how virtualization actually helps to simplify the internal environment, because you're not going from a specific machine for an app and all the cabling, etc., and single path to the user, for example, that's happening. When you put virtualization and good management in place, which is the key to everything, you can actually start to cut down the layers of branches getting in your way, and eventually move towards a nicely mown lawn of a data center where things run smoothly, very effectively, and you can see problems coming.
But as you were saying earlier, is that, some people, some of the virtualization deployments I've seen are just as bad as the ones on the left. They're just a virtual jungle. The server sprawl, things are misconfigured.
You come into these and you think, oh no, I thought this would be a 1 week job and it's a 1 month job. Yeah,
and they're just a nightmare. They're just a virtual version of the mess that was there previously. But it's even worse because previously there was an element of control that because servers used to cost money, that used to slow people down.
Stop people making it worse, yeah.
Yeah, because switches and network ports cost money, you needed someone to come and cable something. It slowed people down from their manic just changing and changing things for change's sake. And in the virtual world, it's even easier to just build more kit for the sake of it, patch it any way you like.
Yeah.
And this is what we're saying around an environment with critical applications in it, is that you do need to get the approach right, and you do need to be in the moving towards a perfectly mown lawn.
But but Andy, you pointed out like half a dozen things that make the perfectly mown lawn visual metaphor difficult to achieve.
Yeah, these are the things we've really got to get on top of to make it a success.
What would you pull out from that?
For me, it is the automating the manual processes, because this impacts very much on the whole time to do things in a business. If you are restricted by the rate at which people can do things, a lot of the advantages of virtualization do go away, and yet you still have the problems of everything else, like contention and scalability. So it's about getting the basics right, so using things like performance management to see where the bottlenecks are and whether things are performing as agreed standards, but making sure, again, that we have the processes, the tooling and the people in place to get this happening really at the speed of the business, not at the speed with which people can make their way around a data centre.
Yeah. Briefly, Deep Fat, anything you pull out from this?
Well, I've already pulled out the fact that we've kind of noticed that with the orchestrator thing. So hopefully we've given that a really good kicking. I think the predictability then speaks to the process. Performance management, yes, you need to understand your performance beforehand, so the assessment and planning.
Get your baseline in.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And then go from there. Contention's an interesting one. We have a different view of virtualization perhaps than our competitors do. So, but we do have recommendation on limiting the contention. So we don't overcommit memory, for example. So if the memory is available, a mission critical workload can take it. And you can set that it always takes it at the expense of lower priority workloads. But if that thing isn't running, then the lower priority workloads will take those resources. But you don't want to be overcommitting CPU, for example, because that's going to lead to a predictability problem.
Yeah.
And so you've got to think about those things. So you have your baseline, and if everything else is not being used, then you can give an even better performance to a mission critical workload, but you don't let it drop below a certain level. I'm rabbiting on here.
No, that's fine. But I want to get to these things, because this to me seems counterintuitive. You've added some more servers onto the same box, and yet got a better result out of it. Is this what we're saying?
This is bizarrely what we're saying. And so first of all, shows that SharePoint is quite good at the scaling thing, because what we've done here is we've added in 2 more web servers in the bottom picture compared with the top one.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, they're now thrashing SharePoint a little harder, but certainly thrashing SQL Server considerably harder. And now we're able to support twice the number of users. So, and they're getting a much better user experience because we've spun up 2 more VMs on the same box without changing the box. So it's kind of, as you say, counterintuitive, but it recognises the fact that sometimes applications just throttle out on a particular virtual machine. There isn't much we can do about them, but we can load balance.
Well, to point to about earlier, is that the bottleneck in an application isn't the tin. So, and it's it becomes very expensive to scale something up. If those were physical servers, you just buy loads more tin. But actually, what we're saying is that quite often the performance impact will be the application itself, and therefore just having more instances of it on the same piece of tin actually increases your capacity, which is exactly what this shows. And there's hundreds and hundreds of cases of this historically. So we were talking earlier. One of the very first cases I remember back in 2003 when Microsoft first bought Connectix was the first virtualisation case I remember was around Citrix and Metaframe at that point. And we used to virtualise Metaframe servers on VMware. We didn't have availability and vMotion in the very early days when we started those things, but there were bottlenecks with internal services that limited the number of concurrent users you could get on a single terminal server, but that wasn't actually a limitation of the tin. So you would run two virtual, back on VMware in those days, two virtual terminal servers on the same piece of physical tin, and that was a very early example where the limitation was in software. And it just gives you increased scalability, and this is exactly what this is showing you, with that, again, if you're looking at third-party apps or apps that you haven't written or you don't understand, there's a high probability that although you're showing high CPU or high memory, that's because the application's single-threaded or there's lots of wait statements in there or whatever, and running multiple versions of it on the same piece of tin will actually alleviate the bottleneck. And it's really, really common. Really common. I say, even modern apps, you can see here that, the web front end in SharePoint, the bottleneck isn't the tin. There's something within IIS or within an SRP filter that's causing a limitation.
It's really common, but it's sort of blown my mind a little bit, I have to say. Again, looking at this, what does this graph show for us, Steve-Fat?
Well, what this is really showing, first of all, is that you can get really good performance on two servers. We've got 16 VMs here sharing a single disk array, but we're running SQL alongside Exchange alongside web server. So this speaks to the point about you don't necessarily have to go and lump everything on the same box. You just need to be careful about setting the parameters about each of those virtual machines, and you can see that it scales really well as the number of virtual machines goes up.
So the trick about this is the fact that each of the bits of the bar are expanding, not one's taking over.
Yeah, one's not taking over the asylum,
But it's also showing you've got you've got multiple apps that you wouldn't normally put on a single piece of tin because they're all going to conflict and blow up, and the thing's going to be unmanageable, unpatchable. What it's showing you is that you can segregate and manage a single piece of, manage all of those apps with just a single virtual machines, and that the tin isn't going to top out. Which is basically what it's showing you. So, it's back to kind of the SBS scenario where SBS is incredibly complex in that you've got all these things working on a single piece of hardware. It's showing you can run them as individual applications on the same piece of hardware with none of that complexity of the components interfering with each other.
So, so we really get into the thing about, don't just throw hardware and network at the thing. This is about the re-architecting and the planning of an environment which is virtualized first. So we're taking virtualized first and then work from that. But now we also got to look at high availability here. Talk us through this one.
So what we've got here is the two grey boxes at the bottom of the screen are physical servers, and they're sharing some shared storage, which is the big grey disk right at the bottom of the screen. Then we've got virtual machines, one virtual machine on each of those physical machines, and they're running a guest cluster. And what that does, if we didn't do that, first we don't know what's happening with the application. I can take one of those physical boxes offline for planned maintenance. I can do my live migration or vMotion, whatever you want to call it. But if I've got SQL running on that cluster, and I want to do planned maintenance on SQL, I've got to take one node offline, and so I need to have a guest cluster to do that. So yes, you can do it, and it's supported, and see it works really, really well. And that's the way you get your high availability. Now, obviously, if you've got to take that grey box down, both of those VMs running the guest cluster could then be on one node on the cluster, but you've still got some high availability, not as much as you would have to run two physical boxes. So you've actually got some quite interesting scenarios there, but you shouldn't need to ever then take down SQL Server. And you've also got this, you've abstracted from your physical hardware, so you can move that cluster around as you need to. You can live migrate each one of those machines around to wherever. And that's what you can do today, and we're about to sort of change the rulebook for SQL, and perhaps you'll ask me back to talk about that some other time.
Well, I'll ask you right now what you're going to change.
Well, we're having a way of replicating SQL Server that uses clustering but not shared storage. You have multiple copies of SQL Server.
Yeah.
So what we have then is we have the primary one maybe doing your OLTP. It's replicating to another one that you can have available to read only, so reporting and backup. And so you're going to get and you can have groups of databases rather than just one, which is what we have in mirroring. So if you need 3 or 4 databases, SharePoint's a good example of that, you create an availability group and then you can move that around, but you don't need to muck about with shared storage. And I could show you how to set it up in 5 minutes, which is also pretty cool.
But you could. I could see your eyes shining. This really is your thing.
Well,
isn't
the accidental DBA is a common phenomenon in the data center. Suddenly somebody's, as IT departments shrink, people suddenly find they're responsible for SQL Server. They don't really know anything about it, and they kind of end up looking after it, which is kind of strange. So we're trying to make it as easy as possible.
So I'm going to skip over our case studies because we'd be basically run out of time, guys. We're filling out. There's hours of this stuff that we could talk about, but but there are also some additional resources there. And I saw that it was if you wanted to download the thing, I saw when you were looking when we were looking at your benchmarking thing with all the different applications and stuff. You put a link on that as well, didn't you?
Yeah, yes, I did.
There's a bit.
That's some research that we commissioned, more quantitative research than the excellent quality.
It's good to get the numbers on this.
We've got here,
on these things, guys. Thank you very much. We have to close pretty quickly now, or else I don't know, they come and hook us off or something like that. So Andrew Deep Fat Fryer, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
That's great. And Alan and Andy Bussey don't have interesting Twitter handles. Thank you very much as well, guys. And I've been Tim Phillips. You can all keep your jobs. Goodbye.